Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Dr. Temple Grandin. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
Well, you're here for the Organic Farming Conference. You've been doing workshops all day. You're a doctor of animal science, a professor at the wonderful veterinary school at Colorado State University, and a consultant to the livestock industry on animal behavior. But you're also an amazing author, an autism activist, and we're celebrating today one of your new books, The Autistic Brain, Thinking Across the Spectrum. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, wonderful to be here.
And how has your experience of New Mexico been, this visit with this wonderful organic farming conference?
I had a great time with at the Organic Farming Conference. I gave a talk this morning on basic animal behavior principles, working on ways to reduce stress on animals, like, for example, get the animal trained to go on a trailer before he has to go in a trailer, so it's not scary and new. Because to animals, something new shoved in the face is really scary and threatening. So you want to reduce the novelty and make the trailer familiar. And then when the animal has to go on the trailer, he's not going to be afraid of it.
Well, you do explain all of that in this wonderful book, Humane Livestock Handling. And you talk about a lot of other things, because in a way they call you a horse whisperer and a cow whisperer, because you look at things from the animal's point of view.
Well, as an autistic person, I'm a total visual thinker. And in the HBO movie, they did a great job of showing how I think visually. If you want to understand an animal, you've got to get away from verbal language. Animals are sensory-based thinkers. Think in pictures, think in sounds, think in smells. It's sensory-based, it's not word-based. So, and also, the animal's world is detailed. So in the very first work I ever did with cattle, I got down in the chutes to see what cattle were seeing. And if it was a chain hanging down, or there was a shadow, or a coat on a fence, or a truck parked next to the fence with a shiny reflection on it, the animals would be afraid of that. You get rid of those distractions, then they'd walk up the chute really easily.
The other thing that you did that was so important, you introduced the idea of curved chutes. What's the difference between driving an animal straight ahead and letting him follow his herd?
Well, cattle have a natural behavior to want to go back to where they come from. So you come on around the bend, he thinks he's going back to where they come from. Another reason why a curved chute works is because as the animal is entering the curved chute, they don't see all the people down at the other end of the chute. And they don't want to approach all those visible people. And one of the points I really want to get across to people is work with behavior. Use behavior to get the animal, the horse or the cow, to do what you want instead of forcing it.
Well, you really did groundbreaking work with your design of slaughterhouses, so much so that, is it true that half of the beef in North America is in processing plants that are based on your designs?
Well, half the cattle are handled in a piece of equipment I designed called the Center Track Restrainer System. And if you watch the HBO Temple Grandin movie, the drawings for that system are actually animated in the title, so the actual construction drawings, that piece of equipment. And I want to emphasize the importance of management. Handling is only half the equipment. Equipment is only half the equation. Other half of the equation is management. You've got to operate things right. And in 1999, I worked with McDonald's and other companies implementing animal welfare audits. And we used a very simple scoring system to measure how well people were handling. Like how many cattle fell down, how many cattle were mooing and bellowing. And you want to pass the McDonald's audit, you're only allowed 3 out of 100 mooing and bellowing when they go into the plant.
And so one of your famous quotes is, I think using animals for food is an ethical thing to do, but we've got to do it right. We've got to give those animals a decent life, and we've got to give them a painless death. We owe the animal respect.
That's absolutely right. And I've done a lot of thinking about this, and none of those cattle would have been born if we hadn't raised those cattle, but we've got to give them a good life. I do have a video up on YouTube, beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin that shows one of those systems being used.
And PETA gave you a visionary award, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals.
That's correct, yes.
Yes, so thank you for that great work. You have 2 animal books, not necessarily livestock related. This is called Animals in Translation.
Yes.
And the new one, this is wonderful. Animals Make Us Human, Creating the Best Life for Animals.
That's right.
And in this, it's divided into cattle, sheep, horses.
That's right.
Chickens. And so dogs and cats. Everyone, what do we need to know about Fido and Fluffy in our own homes?
Well, first of all, getting away from verbal language. All animals, it doesn't matter whether it's a dog, cat, or horse, cow, they don't think in verbal language. Also, it's bottom-up thinking, details. They pay attention to details. Like you might get an animal gets a fear memory. Like a horse might get afraid of a guy wearing a black cowboy hat, but a white cowboy hat's just fine, because a black cowboy hat was associated with something bad. See, animal thinking's very specific. Autistic thinking, too, is very specific. The normal human mind tends to drop out all the details. Well, sometimes we're dropping out too many details and not getting problems solved.
Well, I was interested even on something like taking your cat or dog to the vet. You suggested that you bring a bath mat or a towel because they're totally disoriented if they're on this slippery stainless steel table, and that causes them to be even more afraid.
Well, slipping on the floor scares animals, scares people too. Putting the dog up on that shiny table, that's like walking around on ice.
Yeah.
And, so you take them to the vet and you put them on a slippery floor, that just makes them panic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do recommend any pet owner or any farmer or agricultural people really need to read your works. Let's go back to autism.
Okay.
Could you, for our audience, just tell us what is autism and what is the spectrum?
Autism is a neurological disorder that the child's born with. It's a very, very big spectrum. People with autism tend to not be that social. Some of the social circuits don't get hooked up in the brain. But it's a huge spectrum. One end of the spectrum, you've got half the people at Silicon Valley. You've got Steve Jobs and you've got Einstein. And Einstein had no language till age 3. There's no black and white dividing line between geeks and nerds and mild autism. We need people in the world interested in things, because when the electrical systems break, it's not going to be the social people that are going to fix them. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have individuals a lot more severe, where they may be nonverbal, they may have difficulty with other medical problems like epilepsy. So at one end of the spectrum, you've got brilliant artist or scientist. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody with a lot more problems. It's a very, very large spectrum. And the problem is diagnosis is behavioral profile. And in the autistic brain, Richard Panik and I mapped the history of the diagnosis, and it's kept changing. It's not precise. Don't get hung up on these labels. It's not precise. You get diagnosed for tuberculosis, that's precise. They can tell you exactly what kind of TB you've got.
Well, in this book, again, The Autistic Brain, you trace your own development from when you were first diagnosed and treated, but it's in a way there's parallels, because as you develop and grow and find the strengths and the gifts in your condition, in autism, so too the science is coming along. And now we've got the brain imaging, and we're learning so much more. And I think you are really embrace this process yourself. You work with...
Well, I've always went in all the different brain imaging studies, and we need to be getting these brain imaging methods out, being used a whole lot more, and get rid of the behavioral profiles, because basically the diagnostics, the way it is now, it is strictly a behavioral profile. It's not a precise diagnosis. Also, I can't emphasize enough, build on the child's strengths. When I was a young child, my ability in art was always encouraged. Kid likes art, build on the art. Get him to do lots of different kinds of art. He's good at math, then build on mathematics. Those kids often have trouble with reading. I couldn't do algebra. Algebra was just hopeless. And I never got to try geometry and trig, and that was a mistake. But there's oftentimes too much emphasis on the deficit and not enough emphasis on the talent area. Another problem I'm seeing is kids with autism get fixated on their favorite things. Well, if he likes airplanes, let's read about airplanes, let's do math with airplanes. Well, I'd much rather have a child fixated on airplanes than fixated on autism. I'm having too many young kids come up to me today, they want to just tell me about their autism. Autism's an important part of who I am, but it's secondary to being a college professor and a livestock specialist. That comes first. I think it's important to have a real job. And I wouldn't want to become not autistic because I like the logical way that I think. But we've got to get these young kids that got to learn work skills. When I was in high school, I had a great science teacher. And before I had my science teacher, I was learning all kinds of work skills, cleaning horse barns, shingling the barn roof, did a sewing job. And too many of these kids aren't learning work skills, like being on time. You got to do what the boss tells you to do.
And you've mentioned in your reading about they're taking a lot of the experiential things out of education. They're taking out shop and art, and they're funneling them into more abstract things. Like history is, much as we like it, it's abstract.
Worst things they've done in the schools is taking out the hands-on classes. When I was a child, I was taught embroidery. I learned sewing. When I was in 4th grade, I had a fabulous Singer Sew handy toy sewing machine. I was sewing costumes for the school play. That was making things, and making things that other people wanted to have. And these things like sewing and cooking and woodworking and welding turn into jobs. Right now we have a shortage of diesel mechanics, auto mechanics, and certified welders. And there's a lot of kids with various labels, kind of quirky and different, maybe labeled with some kind of learning difference, or they got dyslexia, that'd be great at diesel mechanics. I think it's terrible they've taken these things out. And I'm seeing too many smart kids getting so addicted to video games, they're not doing anything else. And that is just terrible. I'm not suggesting banning video games, but being a video game beta tester is not a reasonable thing. Yeah. And I'm the kind of kid that if video games had been around in the 60s, I would have become a total addict, and I wouldn't have been out learning things that could turn into a career.
You say, where will the next Jane Goodall come from? Where will the next Steve Jobs or Einstein come from if these people aren't, if they're allowed to tune out and go into the world of video games?
Well, I'm worried the next Steve Jobs or Einstein's going to be playing video games all day and doing nothing else. And when I was a young child, I was allowed to do a 50s video game, which was spinning a brass thing on the bedpost, round and round and round and round. I was allowed to do that for an hour after lunch, but then the rest of the time it wasn't allowed. And I was expected to be on time. And I went away to a special boarding school after I got thrown out of school for throwing a book at a girl who teased me. Got thrown out of a large high school. That was terrible. And I went to special boarding school. And they kind of let me off the hook on studying and let me do my own thing. But there was one place where they drew a line in the sand. I was not allowed to become a recluse in my room. I had to come to meals. I had to go to classes, even though I didn't study. I had to go to chapel. I had to not be staying in my room. And I'm seeing too many kids where they're not learning basic skills like shopping and just basic manners and things like that. That was pounded into me. And there are a few kids that become a video game designer, but for everyone that could be a video game designer, there's 10 more just getting addicted to them.
Yeah, you talk about we wouldn't have the inventions unless we supported the Asperger autism.
Well, yeah, we got to have the people that are interested in things. Okay, at the Super Bowl, the electricity went off. Well, you've got to have somebody that can fix the substation. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get fried. Stupid people can't work on electrical substations. And we need people doing a lot of these very skilled trades. I'm not talking about things like floor tiles and putting up sheetrock. That's semi-skilled stuff. But really skilled things like electricians and mechanics and machinists. Our economy needs those people. They're going to keep things running.
Tell me about the spear. Who made the spears? What would our life? What would
well
early man have
think
been?
Back in the caveman days. Who do you think made the first stone spear or the first bow and arrow? It certainly wasn't the yak socializing around the campfire, that's for sure. It was some Asperger that figured out how to make a bow and arrow. We'd still be living in caves if it hadn't been for take out a few social circuits and then you get geek circuits for making stuff. But it's a big spectrum. And you're going to have half the people on the spectrum that are not going to be doing those things. But if they get the right training and the right education, then they can do a simple job. They can learn how to cook. They can learn how to dress themselves and do those sorts of things.
You had mentioned that you learned your social skills because, some people with the like you said, more neurons going to math and science and figuring out how things work and less to social skills. You learned it as if you were in a play.
Well, I had to be taught it as in a play. And the way you've got to teach it is specific examples. Let's say I'm in the, let's say right now, I just reached across like this and I just grabbed this book. Now, a lot of parents would say, no, The correct thing to say would be ask Lorene to pass it. In other words, give the instruction. We'd go shopping at the store, and I'd be touching merchandise, and my mother would say, you can only touch the things that you're going to buy. She would give the instruction. I stuck my tongue out in church, she'd say, put it back in your mouth. Or if I chewed with my mouth open, get your mouth closed and chew with your mouth closed. She would give the instruction. So those manners and skills were taught by specific example. See, it's bottom-up thinking, not top-down. Okay, I don't understand what rude is that, but I understand that by specific example. Pushing in line is rude. Telling somebody they're, ugly would be rude. Again, I have to learn that by specific example, then put those specific examples in the rude file.
Your mother must have been an extraordinary woman.
Well, she just kind of had good instincts. And the thing is, there's other people my age that are undiagnosed on the spectrum. They've had good jobs and kept them all their life. And I think the more rigid 50s upbringing, where kids were taught manners in a very systematic way, was helpful. Now, I had severe autism as a little kid and no language till age 4. They used to put kids like me just away in the institution. But you take the kind of milder, geeky kind of Asperger kid, I've seen people all over the place, and I work in the meat industry, that I know are on the spectrum, like a brilliant maintenance guy that's kind of weird, or the guy that keeps track of all the tools in the tool room, or somebody that fixes a copying machine. But we need those kind of people.
Let's talk about the movie, because HBO had an award-winning biography of you, starring Claire Danes. And I think it was a wonderful portrayal of your life. You even liked it.
They did a fabulous job.
Yeah.
She became me in the 60s and the 70s. I also love the fact that all my projects are accurate in the movie.
Yeah.
I actually did build that gate. They replicated my dipping vat system just perfectly. The optical illusion room and the squeeze machine. I love the fact that they replicated my projects, because I'm really concerned I'm seeing too many smart, geeky kids just not going anywhere today. In other words, kids on the higher end of the spectrum seem to have more difficulty getting jobs, where ones who are my age actually have jobs.
You were named by Time Magazine one of the 100 most influential people in the world, and you were named one of their heroes. And you have made it such a calling to translate animals to normal people and autistic people.
And I'm very interested in the autism, but I won't let it totally take over. I've had situations where people ask me to go to an autism meeting, I say, you got to give me a good cattle meeting to go along with it, because I don't like it when 9-year-olds walk up to me and all they want to do is tell me about their autism. I'd rather have them tell me about their science project, or they love to train dogs, or they like medieval knights, or they like airplanes, some other fixation that we can broaden out and turn into a career. Because becoming a public speaker on autism, that's not a career option for everybody. And I'm going to still teach my class. I am a animal welfare auditor instructor for PACO, Professional Animal Auditor Certification Organization, and they wanted to put the book tour for the autistic brain on top of PACO training. No.
Yeah.
I'm a PACO instructor. That's my real job. I got to take the 3 days off to teach people how to audit animal welfare at the slaughter plants.
Yes, yes. Talk about those 9-year-olds with, that are hung up on video games or something. I was surprised in the reading at all these there's really simple things that can help. Talk about the pink glasses for some people, or printing up things on colored paper.
Well, let's talk about some of the sensory issues.
Yeah.
Sensory issues are very variable. I had problems with sound sensitivity. I still have problems with scratchy things against my skin. I actually have another shirt on underneath this that's been washed a whole bunch of times. I still have a problem with that, so you wear something else under it that's really soft. Some cotton is soft, other 100% cotton is scratchy. I don't know why. It's something with a weave or the type of cotton. Now sound sensitivity, sometimes you can desensitize if the child turns on the sound he can't stand, like the buzzer on the scoreboard in the gym. He goes down there and turns it on. There are some kids that when they go to read, like if they look at this piece of paper and they look at the print, they'll see the print jiggle. Some children that have dyslexia have this problem. And sometimes you just try printing the homework on different pastel papers. Trying on different pale colored glasses will help this. And not everybody with autism has this. Maybe only 10% of people with autism have this problem. And about 10% of people with dyslexia have this problem. And then if you have the child that can't do algebra, let's go to geometry and trigonometry. You know, let's get a little more flexible. We need to be getting a lot more into thinking, what is this child going to do when they grow up? And the skilled trades are a really good place, not for everybody with autism, but for some of them. Because you got three kinds of minds. You have the photorealistic visual thinker like me, who thinks in pictures, who's going to have trouble with algebra. Then you got the mathematician mind, the pattern thinking mind, and sometimes those kids have trouble with reading. That's a kid where he may need to be advanced ahead in math, but he may need some special ed in reading. Then you have another type that loves writing and history, and they love to talk on and on about their favorite sports scores or whatever their movies or whatever their favorite thing is, and they have good writing skills. Some would make good journalists. Some would be very good at specialty retail, where you know all the merchandise, everything about men's shoes or everything about jewelry or whatever the specialized merchandise was. Where the mathematician mind, they're your computer programmers and your engineers. And then you have the artists, the industrial designers like me. And the thing is, we need the different minds working together. Because Steve Jobs, well, Business Week magazine said he was a weird loner that brought snakes to school. And he got teased and teased and teased. He was saved by the local neighborhood computer club. He was the artist that designed the user interface for the iPad and the iPhone. And the engineers have to make the insides work. So you've got to have both kinds of minds working on these projects.
You've said that your work is your life and that you love making the world a better place. Indeed, you do. What are you working? And you love solving problems. What are you working on now?
Well, I always liked to solve problems, and I'm really interested in this whole different kinds of minds. Like when I found out why the Japanese nuclear power plant blew up, I just couldn't believe it. They made a mistake that a visual thinker like me would not make. And I realized the mathematicians don't see it because it's a different kind of mind. Well, they put the emergency generators and all their emergency equipment for the emergency cooling in a non-waterproof basement. And when it filled up full of water, well, any farmer can tell you diesels don't work underwater. It's just that simple, and that's why 4 nuclear reactors burned up. That's a mistake I wouldn't make. I've been following this thing about this airplane and this battery. And when I first heard about that, I go, get that battery off that plane. Let's go with another kind of battery. Airbus has already decided to go to NICADs. Let's not have a fire on an airplane. Yeah. That battery technology is just not ready. And they went through all of this risk analysis. I think it was pure BS. Because there's risk in the risk analysis they didn't put in their equation. How about 3 cargo jets that burned up hauling batteries as their cargo? How about the laptop that caught on fire in the overhead of a plane because the battery had a defect in the manufacturer? Well, that laptop battery is this big. This other thing is 63 pounds, I think it weighs, in a non-fireproof box. And when it did have the fire in the plane, it welded itself to the plane and they had to cut it loose with the hydraulic jaws of life and chuck it out the door. I don't think a battery belongs on that plane. And you get right down to it, that's where the problem is. But you see, I'm adding other things to the equation, like the cargo jets that burned and the laptop that caught on fire. You see, that's probably not in their risk analysis, but I'm an associative thinker. So I'm going into, okay, battery fires, airplane fires. What happened? I have been on the Dreamliner. I didn't know about the battery at the time.
Yeah, right.
And I don't want to fly with that battery.
Yeah.
And it better be able to withstand whatever the airplane's electrical system you dish out to it. It better not catch on fire. I don't care what the plane's electrical system does to it. It needs to be designed so it cannot burn up the airplane. It's just that simple.
How do you decide? I mean, here's a problem that needs solving, and you have an approach to a solution to it. How do you decide which problems to solve?
Well, first of all, the electrical system in that plane is complicated, and nobody's going to be able to predict everything that it can do. Okay, so now how do I know that? Because when they worry about cell phones causing trouble on planes, or like 10 years ago, some laptop on a certain program made the cockpit instruments go crazy, and then they tried to go back and duplicate it with the same computer, with the same software, they couldn't do it. But there's really only 4 things the plane's electrical system can do to the battery. Short it out, give it a surge, overcharge it, drain it too fast. That's all it can do. So you design the battery so those 4 things can't hurt it. It's that simple. Because a hot fire, where it puts out oxygen, this thing puts out oxygen when it burns. It's really hard to put it out.
I just, talk about the spectrum. We talk about the
Yeah.
autism spectrum, but when I look at the spectrum of your mind and your endeavors, it is absolutely, absolutely amazing. I want to just sum some of
There's
these
a
things
certain
up.
kind of thinking I'm good at, and there's other things I'm not good at.
Well, you're really good at animals, and this
Well,
book.
animals are sensory-based thinkers.
Yeah, yeah. This is Animals Make Us Human. It's a recent book. Your brand new book is called The Autistic Brain.
We have a whole chapter in there on the different kinds of minds and the research that shows that those different kinds of minds really work. Both the PET scan studies that show that there's different kinds of minds, and tests, paper and pencil tests. See, in your brain, the photorealistic thinker, that's the circuit in the brain for what is something. The mathematician mind is for where are you in space. And I have a whole lot of the what is something circuit. And we're going to present all the scientific verification that there is these different kinds of thinking. And most so-called normal people are more sort of in the middle.
How would you advise those so-called normal people? How would you have them approach people with autism?
Well, don't be vague. People come to me and they say, what's the most important thing you can do for autism? Well, if you're working with a 3-year-old that's nonverbal, it's 20 or 30 hours a week of one-to-one teaching. That's the same for everybody. But then as soon as you go past that, they're going to diverge. And they're kind of two kinds of groups. There's the group that's going to be able to do the kind of things I can do, and the ones where if you get the right training, they might be able to do a simple job at an office, maybe running a copiers or something like that. But people are vague. They'll ask me questions like, what do I do about behavior problems in the classroom? I don't know how to answer that. I don't know how old the child is. I don't know anything about whether he talks. I don't know what the behavior problem is. See, that's the normal language-based brain getting way too vague. I can't possibly answer that question without asking a whole lot more questions.
I've seen that because people want a generalization from you, but you're very specific. How old is a child, or what exactly is the animal doing? And that
I can't answer it. If somebody comes up to me, they'll say, my horse goes berserk or my dog is crazy. I have heard that over and over again at conferences. Now, I don't know. Did this dog be all happy and jump on somebody? Is that the dog is crazy? Or the dog bite somebody? How I'm going to deal with biting or jumping on people, I'm going to work with that totally different ways. I got to know what he means by a crazy dog. I don't know what a crazy dog is until I ask questions. I couldn't even begin to answer it.
Well, I know people come to you and ask you all of these questions, but I am so grateful that you've taken the time to be with us in New Mexico today. Our guest today is Dr. Temple Grandin. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.